Hi, everybody. Gene here. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, where every single week we answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping so you can get the most out of your tapping, practice, eliminate self-sabotage, and take action more easily. As I mentioned last week, I'm doing a new little program where you get the opportunity to be reminded to tap regularly. I hear it all of the time from my clients when we're chatting on the phone. Oh, I wish I remembered to tap. I need to tap more. And so what I'm doing is for the next calendar year, 3 times a week, I am going to be sending text messages out. And the text messages are just going to have a quick note of encouragement as well as a link to take you to a place where you can do some tapping right away. Now, the content that I'm going to be sharing with you, the tapping, isn't going to be new content. So it's not exclusive stuff. It's going to be stuff from me. It's going to be stuff from a number of past guests on this show. It's more an issue of being a reminder so you remember to tap. It's just a little poke throughout your day. The text will come during the day. It won't be the middle of the night, at least for people in North America. But you can sign up all over the world. It won't be super distractive. And it's only going to cost $20. And that's not $20 a month. That's $20 for the entire year. And realistically, that $20 is just an administrative fee to make it so that I can at least break even. And probably I'm not even going to do that. But this is more about this idea of the more people we get tapping more regularly, the healthier people are, the better the world is going to be. All year we've been talking about trying to get 9 new people tapping a day. And it's great that we introduce tapping to new people, and I want you to do exactly that. But it's also important for those of us who do know to tap to remember to tap. So this is a really easy way to do that. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/SMS. Those 3 letters are S as in Sam, M as in Michael, S as in Sam, because text messages are often called SMS. tappingqa.com/SMS. Or if you go into the show notes, you can see a link where you can go and sign up right away. If you have any questions, please reach out. I've received a number of really great questions from folks, and I would love to make this system work for you. You can drop me a note, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. This is Gene Monterostelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 370, originally aired July 3rd, 2019. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, I have a conversation with Kate Anthony about divorce. And this is for people who are wondering if divorce is the right choice for them. And this is for people who have been through divorce and need help on the other side. Now, if you are not in this circumstance, I would still really encourage you to listen to today's conversation, because we talk about a number of what I call well-meaning incompetence. People who say and do things who are trying to be helpful, but they're not actually. And so by listening to this conversation, you're going to be in a position to be able to be more supportive and more helpful for the people who are going through this sort of circumstance. Before we do that, I just want to thank everybody who is a financial supporter of the Tapping Q&A podcast. Because of that support, starting next month, we're going to start providing transcripts of a number of the past episodes so everybody can benefit from that, and the supporters get an opportunity to have a hand in choosing which episodes we're going to be transcribing. If you would like to be a supporter, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. There are a number of bonuses for people who do that, including, at one level, the opportunity to get a custom audio and a custom tapping script from me. Recently, I just sent out a bunch of emails following up with people who I haven't produced those for yet because you haven't given me a topic. So if I still owe you a tapping, please check your inbox or just send me an email, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com, so we can make sure that that is taken care of. If you'd like me to create a custom script for you and receive a number of other awesome bonuses, tappingqa.com/support. In this conversation with Kate, as we talk about wrestling with relationships and should I stay and should I go, and once you've made that decision, how to do it healthily, as a tapper, this is what I want you to do. I want you to, if you can, listen to this with pen and paper if you're in this circumstance, And what we do is we spend a lot of time talking about the emotional questions that come up and the resistances to taking action. And so as we're doing this for you, we're going to hit on a number of pieces of resistance and a number of pieces of emotion that resonate with you. And so what I want you to do is I want you to grab those, because that is going to be the entry point to your tapping. Because we're not going to be in a situation where we're in a relationship that we don't know if it's working out or not, that we're going to tap our way to saving the relationship. What we're going to do instead is we're going to tap in such a way that we get to a place where our emotions are proportionate and well-informed so that we're making the best choice for us. And you'll notice I didn't say, based on this conversation, we're going to unlock this stuff and you're going to be completely emotion-free. Because emotions are good and healthy. We've talked about that lots and lots of times in the past. But instead, what's going to happen is you're going to hear Kate talk about a number of things that might have been a thought that crossed your mind, but because of a cultural reason or because it's just an emotion that comes quickly, you dismiss the thought. And so this conversation is going to give you permission to really connect with the resistances, the limiting beliefs, and the emotions that you feel as you're going through this process. And so then what that will do is that will put you in a position where you now have really simple pieces of resistance to tap on. Because sometimes it's not knowing how to tap, it's about unearthing the limiting beliefs and the emotions that are there in order to allow us to tap. And oftentimes we're too close to what's going on to be able to do that. So this conversation is going to structure that really, really well. Now, as a side note, this is actually the first of 2 back-to-back podcasts, which are going to be about relationships. Next week, we're going to be talking about tapping and responding to being in a situation where you are in a dangerous and an abusive relationship. And so approaching a relationship that is dangerous and abusive is really different than just approaching a relationship that is no longer a good fit for you. So I really want you to spend some time with this conversation, see where it resonates, see what tapping you can do. And then next week, we're going to be approaching it from a slightly different angle to give you a different set of resources for you to be healthy in the relationships that you are in. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Kate Anthony. How did you find your way to wanting to be working with women who are in a situation where they're just trying to figure out what's next in their relationship and if they should stay or if they should move on to something else?
Well, I mean, I sort of came to it, I think, as most people come to what they love and are passionate, deeply passionate about by having gone through the experience myself. Mm-hmm. And I was in a deeply dysfunctional marriage that was very painful, very volatile. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I spent years thinking, should I stay or should I go? Should I stay or should I go? And I ended up, I only knew one other person who had gone through the process and been divorced. And he was actually somebody that we were in group couples therapy with. Okay. So that's a thing. Yep. So he was on his second marriage in the group with us. And, but I knew that he'd been divorced. So I pulled him aside one day and I was like, David, how do I know? How do you know when you've just done all you can do and you've reached the end of the line? And he looked at me. He was so kind and so gentle and such a sweet man. And he looked at me and he goes, Kate, when you know, you'll know. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that is not what I'm looking for.
You are not giving me useful information here. I'm asking you because I don't.
Because I don't know. I don't know. And so I didn't know that at the time that was sort of the seed that was planted for me really figuring out, all right, what is the process? What is everything I wish I had known? If I had been able to call a coach and say, what do I need to know? What did I want to know? What did I need to know? So that's really how I got into it. I also got into it because despite the fact that I had a tremendously volatile and horrible marriage, my ex and I had a phenomenal divorce.
Okay.
I think we were so relieved to not be married anymore and to not be like trying to force this issue anymore that we were like, all right, great. What's next?
Yeah.
And everything that we had done to try to save our marriage, or that I thought we were trying to do to save our marriage, which I think we'll get into later, we just put to use to save the divorce. And so I became the go-to person. People immediately started coming to me going, how did you do that?
Right.
And so it just all kind of blended together to become what I now do.
Yeah. So I can imagine, not having been in that circumstance, I can imagine that as you were asking that question, how do I know?
Yeah.
You probably had a couple of things going on interiorly as you're making that decision. You had intellectual pieces of data as you're describing the sense of this is what is going on inside of this relationship. And objectively, I can see this is not right. Obviously, you're in couples counseling, so you were trying to figure out what that thing was.
Yeah.
At the same time, I know in my own life that there are times where I bump into things that are intellectually make sense and are obvious. And there's this other resistance that's going against that.
Yes.
So for someone who is in that circumstance, and we'll say for the moment, just for the conversation, that objectively, it's probably a good idea that divorce is the next logical step.
Right.
What are the internal emotional resistances that were either from your own experience, that were cultural, that were whatever, that were the ones that you were bumping into, or the ones that now that you work with people one-on-one, that they are bumping into in that particular experience?
It's a great question. The biggest one, I work mostly with moms, and that's the biggest one. How is this going to affect my children?
Okay, yeah.
Should I stay for my kids? Because culturally, we're often told that we need to stay for our kids. We're told that children from, quote, broken homes, which is a term that I cannot stand.
Yeah.
But we're told that children from broken homes go on to have emotional problems. They have mental problems. They become drug addicts and alcoholics and like all of the things, right?
Yeah.
And we're basically sure we're going to screw up our kids if we get divorced. The data does not support this, but most of us don't know that.
Right.
Most of us have a gut feeling that, oh my God, I'm going to break my kid. And so that is one hurdle. And I think, and you know, then I even have a training on this. Like there is tons of data that supports the fact that staying in an unhappy marriage for your children is bad for your children. And that creating two, you know, my ex and I mean, we're just one data point, but we're a good example of this, that our home was toxic. And he is now remarried to a woman that he is far better suited for. They are a way better match than he and I ever were. They have a super happy home. There's a lot of laughter. There's love. It's, you know, even my parents say when they go over there, they'll say like, man, everything's so happy there.
Right.
And the same thing for me. And I am not partnered, but I am able to present to my son the image of a strong, happy, independent woman, which I think in this day and age is super important. For boys to grow up with as role models. So the data doesn't support the idea that that divorce damages children. And yet, like on an emotional level, we get caught up in that. Yeah. That's one. And I think there's the other thing, which is just, isn't there just one more thing? Isn't there just one more thing?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't there just one more thing, right? Like I've tried everything, and you hear stories of magic bullets, and you know, you go to personal development programs and they talk about like the transforming moment that everything changed for their marriage. And I was constantly buying into the idea that there's just one more thing.
Right.
That I was 100%. There's a lot of this, right? That people talk about how relationships are 50-50. And then there's the concept that they're actually 100-100, right? That we are each 100% responsible for how we show up in the relationship, and that really we're only responsible for how we show up, all of which is true. Where this gets a little sideways, and I think becomes not helpful, is when we say, so I'm 100% responsible, and I can be 100% responsible. If I just work hard enough on myself, everything will change.
Yeah.
And that's just not true.
Right.
It's true that everyone's 100% responsible.
Right.
But,
And we're in circumstances where it is impossible. Like, there are relationships that are just not meant to last in that way. And, we could be tapping and meditating and yogiing 28 hours a day for the next 10 years and it's still not going to work out, because no amount of transformation is going to make the relationship work.
Exactly. And it is simply an unworkable relationship. And the day that I saw that, the day that I accepted that my marriage was simply unworkable, and that it was beautiful, and I'm so grateful. I think we were meant to come together. We were meant to have this kid. We were meant to co-parent. I'll tell you, my ex and I were meant to co-parent in different houses. We could not, and still cannot, co-parent under the same roof. We'll try to have dinner together and it'll get like really tense. We still can't co-parent under the same roof, but we do it brilliantly from separate houses.
Excellent. So in addition to that, I don't have nearly the experience you do, but I've certainly worked with some clients who've been facing that particular conversation. And I've heard lots of pushback from my clients about feeling like failing, judgment, the pushback from the people around them. That's a really natural way for us to resist change is this might be right for me, but I don't want to deal with the blowback that comes from these other places. So what are the different flavors of that sort of resistance that might be showing up?
So I've worked with a lot of clients who encounter religious pushback. Okay. Who are, because I'm a coach, I can work with people all over the country, all over the world, right? I'm not limited to like therapeutic settings, which is face-to-face, right? So I have a lot of clients who are in the Bible Belt. And so there's a lot of religious pushback that, be a good wife, you shouldn't want for more. That's not what this is about. This is a God-given sort of union, and your job is to serve your husband and don't worry about yourself. Kind of messages. Or that you are, so there's cultural, I have, a couple of women, at least one in my Facebook group, who are Muslim and deeply religious. And so there's an entire cultural aspect there where, her husband and her family view her as her husband's property.
Right.
That's deep. That is, and also dangerous to try and break out from in the culture. So there's that. There's the cultural and religious aspects, and then there's just people not getting it because they're not inside your marriage, right? And that's a huge thing. Is that a lot of women that I work with, they want to be able to sort of expose the truth, perhaps, or like they feel like they need to justify themselves to the outside world, right? And I always say, like, it's none of anybody's business. They are not inside your marriage. You're not inside their marriage. None of us know what's going on behind closed doors. And a lot of the work that I do with women is around self-confidence and around ownership of their own story and their own power, their own needs, and that they get to own their story. They get to own if they're unhappy, and they don't need to justify it to anybody else.
Right.
And before we get to that point, we go through a whole ton of work to be sure that they're taking responsibility for the things that are theirs, and they're not just, this isn't a sort of selfish, narcissistic, well, I'm not happy, so I'm leaving, because you're going to repeat the pattern and you'll end up in the exact same marriage a second time around. So, yeah.
And I think what's interesting inside of that, in what you said right there, and what we talked about earlier about, it's almost like you've just hit the two extremes. One extreme is there's one more piece of transformation I need to do to save this. The other extreme is, boy, this is a hard day, therefore I need to eject myself from this relationship.
Yes.
And recognizing the fact that that's part of what I can see complicating this so much, that it's so nuanced in trying to figure out what are the things that require me to transform so that I'm able to be present to a relationship that is healthy for me, be it this one or any relationship in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the kind of abstract me inside of a relationship.
Right.
And then the other piece of it is the specific of the relationship that I am in this particular moment, and being able to navigate both of those things. And that's why this becomes so fuzzy, is because it's, how do you know? Well, like it's not this clear, obvious thing that you referenced earlier and so I can imagine, because I've been in circumstances like this where there are both those extremes where I could be at either of those extremes as well.
Yes.
Where there are times in which I am just done with this thing and I want to be out of it. And there are other times where I'm like, I'm going to make this thing work, damn it. And I'm going to put whatever into it. And so I can imagine from moment to moment or day to day, the people you're working with are traveling this emotional journey on that pendulum of trying to find the spot that makes sense.
100%. And it's, you can't do it alone. Mm-hmm. I really think that's the kind of work that you can't do alone. You have to, there's so much information gathering. Like, we have to do the work on ourselves. We have to figure out, like, am I an avoidant? Right? We want to look at your attachment styles. Am I an avoidant? When things get hard, do I cut and run? Is that my MO? Where else does that show up in my life? I don't know a lot of moms or parents, for that matter, that get to that point because the kids are such an anchor.
Right.
But do we emotionally disconnect? Do we emotionally cut and run? Is that my habit based on my original attachment and all of that? And we have to look at that. Or do I cling to things, like you said, like with a death grip and never let go, even when all of the information is saying this is not right? And I think one of the things that I also want to look at is, we're talking about the disconnect. So it's almost like a mind-body disconnect, right? The disconnect between what you know intellectually and what your body knows.
Yeah.
And, if I had realized how much my body knew and how much I was holding on, and crushing inside on a sort of cellular level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of staggering.
Well, it is. And at the exact same time, so there is this gut instinct that's telling you that you want to leave. And there is this resistance that sees that it is dangerous for you to do that. It thinks that you are a failure, or you're going to wreck the kids or whatever. And, that desire to be healthy in those things and that perceived sense of this is how I'm safe, of course that's going to overrun our instincts. We always hear danger first, which is a good thing. When I'm standing in the middle of the street, it's good that I'm hearing danger and I'm not assessing the quality of the car that's about to hit me. Right. And so in a circumstance like this, we have the klaxon blaring sound of danger, and we have this very subtle nuance intuition. And so it makes perfect sense that your resistance was winning in that particular circumstance and your intuition wasn't.
Yes, absolutely. And there's also for many women who, especially, and like I was a stay-at-home mom, then there's the, how am I going to survive?
Right.
How am I ever going to make it beyond this point? How am I going to make it on my own? How am I going to afford to pay all of the bills? right? All of that as well.
So one of the things I think you identified really, really well is getting information from the outside, because and oftentimes in these circumstances, we are so close to what is going on, we can't see it clearly.
Absolutely.
And so by having not just a conversation externally, but having a conversation externally by someone who understands the nuance of what is going on, forever I am, there's three things I bring my clients. I bring expertise. I'm really good at what I do. I bring experience. I've been down this road before. And number three, I'm not inside of your head. So I'm not actually experiencing all of this. And so as we have a conversation about this, it gives us the opportunity for me to be present and helpful to you in a different than you just being able to understand these particular things.
Yes.
So as you're going through this process and you're working with someone or your own personal experience, and you make the decision, okay, it's time. I need to start doing this thing. And there is the confidence or lack their confidence, but there's certainly something specific in making the decision.
Mm-hmm.
After that moment, I'm guessing that resistance doesn't magically go away.
Right. Oh, no.
Is the resistance to change, is it the same stories over and over again and are amplified because you're starting the process? Or is there a new set of resistance, concerns, feelings that become pressure in the process that is different than before you've made the decision?
I think that ultimately they boil down to the same thing, but there's different circumstances, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Often what will happen is, and this is very, I think this is a little gender-based, but that women it tends to be that when we're done, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
When we get to that point, we're just done. And oftentimes we have worked really hard to try to bring our husbands into the process with us. 9 times out of 10, I see women having asked their husbands to go to therapy and the husband's not getting on board with them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are plenty of, I get, messages all the time from men saying, I was that in my marriage. So I know that this is not universally true. And I think that personal development in general and therapy is certainly more highly consumed by women than men, generally speaking. This goes to an entire cultural issue of, toxic masculinity and men not being invited into conversations of development at the rates at which women are. And this is a huge cultural problem. And this actually does affect, I talk about this all the time in my work because it does affect it, right? It does matter that we're not inviting men into these conversations as much as we are inviting women, generally speaking. So what I will see is that women, when they get done, they get done. Feel like they've tried everything. And then they say to their husbands, I'm done. And then all of a sudden their husbands they freak out. And there's a lot of love bombing. There's a lot of, I've changed. I read all the books. Now I'm changed. And then the women start to doubt themselves again.
Yeah.
Then it's an immediate, oh, well, okay, he says that he's changed. It's been a week, but he says now he gets it, right? And so it's essentially the same diagnosis of trusting yourself, trusting your experience, knowing where you're at. I talk a lot about also sort of we have got to become like giant oak trees with roots so deeply planted that no matter how hard the wind blows, we do not fall down. Mm-hmm. And when we've made that decision, that is no less true, right? We have got to continue to deepen those roots so that when someone comes to us and says, oh, I get it now, we actually know what that means and whether that's true. And my response is always give it 2 weeks. Because often the love bombing will happen. And then when it doesn't work, all of the anger, all of the rage, all of the behaviors that got you to this point come back around.
Right.
And so there's your answer.
Yeah. And I the vocabulary love bombing, that's beautiful. I love that as an imagery of just knowing what that experience looks like. And it's tactical, and it might not be consciously tactical by the person who is doing it.
Exactly.
But it's a tactical thing. I'm trying to win this thing back that on some level I value. And like anything else, at a certain point we recognize the tools and tactics we're not using, and so we try something else.
Right.
And so if you are standing fast and saying, okay, I'm just going to see what happens here, and if it doesn't change, they're going to take a new tactic. I think that's really useful. I think the other thing, as you're kind of wrestling with that idea of, who's buying in, who's doing the gender-based, think of all that. I have a feeling, and I'm just guessing, is the person who is going to just be done is the person who has fought the hardest to try and save it initially.
Yes.
And they've exhausted their resource. And
absolutely.
Oftentimes culturally, we are in a point where more often than not, that is the female in a male-female partnership.
Yep.
But I'm guessing it's whoever has worked the hardest to save, then they're done because they've spent everything they have in that process.
I think you are 100% right. Thank you for clarifying that from a sort of more open gender position.
Yeah.
I think it's true. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. And because of, the way that we are culturally formed and the way that gender roles show up in what we do, I would agree. Like, it is more than likely going to be the woman who is in that particular circumstance and these type of relationships, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
So after we've made a decision, we have survived the initial fluctuation of the emotion of the person recognizing that this is what is going on. We're going through the process. What are you finding people are bumping into, like the denouement, the aftermath, we've been through this thing. Now I'm on the other side. Now what? Because it's not a clean slate. Like, in a lot of ways, we've cleared out things from our life that are no longer useful in serving us. But Mark, do we carry those experiences with us? So then what are the kind of pitfalls and the emotional resistances, and what does that look like for the folks you've worked with, or your own experience?
So there are two, I think, separate categories that I want to address with this, right? There's the personal life. Yep. There's the recovery, the emotional recovery from this process. And then there's when you get divorced from someone with whom you have children, you don't get to walk away. And so you have to completely transform that relationship. And it's so much easier to break up with someone and never see them again, never speak to them again, right? Like, you don't have to deal with that. But when you have kids, the day after you say you want a divorce, you have to co-parent. You have to get up and have breakfast. You don't get to pack your bags and take off in the middle of the night.
Right. Well, you can, but you're deciding not to because you actually love your children. You want what's best for them.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a choice.
You can, but there's so much.
Right. There's real consequences to that one.
Real consequences for that one. So, including that you're going to be on the hook for a lot of child support because 100% if you abdicate responsibility, you got to pay it all. So on the personal level, right, I often talk about the fact that while we kind of know the statistic that 50% of first marriages end up in divorce in the US, 68% of second marriages also end up in divorce, and then 74% of third marriages suffer the same fate.
Wow.
And that's because we don't do the really hard work on ourselves to figure out what went wrong the first time and where we were responsible. We just like to trade out the partner, next please. And then we end up in the same or similar relationships. This is why we always talk about how, like, I've, dated the same guy in 45 different bodies in my life, right? Like, there's a reason for that. So from a personal perspective, doing the really hard work to grieve what went wrong and really, sometimes, and this is a mistake that I made in my divorce, was I was so stoked to get out that I was like, woohoo! When I got out, I was so excited. I was so happy. I was free. And I think all of that was very genuine. Like, I was no longer living under the oppression of having been emotionally abused for 10 years. So I was very liberated. But it took a few years before the grief actually hit, and I had to contend with that. And one of the things that I will say that is not a pretty thing to have to sort of say is that, I've been divorced for 10 years, and I still have layers of this that come over me and that come up. And I had a really bad one hit in December, and it's been really hard for me to have to work through. And it's, it's my own stuff, right? It's my own. Yes, I'm angry at him. I learned some things about him and then about my marriage in December. I mean, it's 10 years. Right. And I got a lot of new information, and I had to process that. And it was, there's, on the one hand, there's what he did, which is unforgivable. And then there's the fact that I was in this relationship and was willfully blind to things that were pretty obvious. Right. And that 10 years later, I had to actually pull back the covers and see all of it. Right. So it goes on. Divorce is a living, breathing experience that goes on and on and on in this way. And so that's our job. And for some people, it's not that difficult, you know?
Well, yeah, but what happens is, long-term relationships, it's not just we're standing next to someone, like that experience knits its way into us.
Yes.
And,
yes.
it's kind of, I always think in terms of like taking some of these things out, like trying to take red out of plaid.
Yeah,
It's there, beautiful. And it's something that can be taken out of. Like we can actually do that, but sometimes it just feels like it's a string at a time because it's knit its way into us because of these unconscious connections we have made because of where we are standing, what we are smelling, what we are listening to. It's impacting in some way every decision of our life.
Yes.
And so when we're coming back to those work decisions, social decisions, all of that stuff, we bring back our past experience from those things. Mm-hmm. And if it's a decade-long relationship, then there's a decade of data every single time I did this thing. That was part of my life. Yeah. Even if it's not consciously pushing and impacting the decision, it is because it's shaping who I am in that particular moment because I'm constantly taking to the fact that I'm part of a partnership and we're doing these things together and that impacts my choices. And so it makes perfect sense that it would take a long time for it to be unwoven from your experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I mean, I love that it's like taking red out of plaid. It really is. It feels cellular. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, if you have kids, if you have biological children, it actually is. Right. I mean, my cells have been altered by the fact that I carried a baby in my body. Mm-hmm. And some of those cells are his. So like literally on a cellular level, he's inside of me. And so it's very complex to extricate yourself from. Yeah. And then while you're trying to do that, you're still continuing to have this person woven in. So it's like trying to take red out of plaid while also continuing to thread yourself with red right to you. Like you're still stitching that together in a new form.
Right.
So there's a lot of that, and there's making decisions and then realizing, ooh, that wasn't right. So, our first Thanksgiving, we all spent it together. We're like, okay, let's just continue this family thing. We can totally do this. We're a family. We're just a different family.
Right.
And then, after a couple of years, that was really awkward and uncomfortable as I was hosting Thanksgiving for him and his various girlfriends. And I was like, what? No. Yeah. And then boundaries are fluid. They are never static. So we're always having to re-examine and check in. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm regularly using the word with my clients. We're renegotiating, implicitly or explicitly, we are constantly renegotiating our boundaries. And I can certainly see in a co-parenting relationship, that's something that's going to be explicit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we've gone a long way in all of this, which is great. We've talked about, in the throes of the question, in the process of after the fact. So someone has been hearing this conversation. They are in a relationship where they've been maybe unconsciously or in the back of their mind asking the question, should I stay or should I go? Mm-hmm. Now I have an opportunity to ask that more consciously. What are the first couple of steps someone should do when they find themselves in that circumstance where they're trying to figure out what they need to be doing next?
Really, the first thing that I do with my clients is the very first thing I do is help them get rooted in their own selves and their own power. So the very first step is, who am I?
Yep.
Who am I? Mostly I find that this is an issue of confidence and self-esteem and self-knowledge. And so that's the first work that we do. Mm-hmm. There are logistical questions. One of the things that I do a lot with my clients is values work. Look at, are we aligned on our values? I had a client once who did values work and she said, I realized that one of my top values is personal development and growth. Mm-hmm. And it was obviously she was working with me as a coach. So obviously, right. And she was married to a man who said, this is who I am. This is who I've always been. Take it or leave it. And had zero interest in self-examination. And that's taking all judgment out of it.
Right.
That's just a complete misalignment.
Yep.
Right. So there's that. And then I mean, it depends on the situation, right? If there's emotional abuse, if you're feeling like you are being criticized a lot, like really looking at that and understanding the dynamics of that. I also do a lot of work with cultural questions in terms of, is this just the way that cis hetero relationships are today? There's tons of studies been done saying, about women carrying the emotional and the mental load in relationships. And no matter how conscious the men are, and no matter how much they feel that they're meeting them, on the playing field, our brains work differently. And so is this just what it is to be in a long-term marriage, or is there something actually really wrong? Right.
Yeah.
So there's all that kind of stuff as well. Yep. And then there's moving into, what is healthy communication? Yep. Does this align? Really looking at what are, I do a lot of work with John Gottman and his 4 horsemen of relationship apocalypse, which are contempt, criticism, stonewalling, and defensiveness. And how much of these things are present in your relationship, because those are relationship toxins.
Yep.
So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, that's great.
Clearly.
Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah. I mean, because
I would say the first thing to do is to look at yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing to do is get really clear about yourself. What is your responsibility? What do you bring to the table? Get into therapy on your own. Go hire a coach on your own. If you're questioning your relationship, the first thing you need to do is look at yourself, no matter how much you want to blame him, because you are still there. You chose this. And the only way that you're going to get clarity is if you really look at what you bring and who you are in this relationship.
Awesome. Well, Kate, thank you very much for your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. I'm so happy to have been here. Thanks a lot.
So lots of really good stuff there. It was, as you can hear from the interview, we had a really good time. Kate is a delight to talk to and has, because of her personal experience and being thoughtful and deliberate about this, has so many great resources. As I said, it's really important for you to get a hold of those limiting beliefs, those ones where you feel like you're trying to live up to someone's expectation, or the cultural baggage around making a decision that is actually the right decision for you. And I thought Kate did a beautiful job of talking about the struggle for parents as they're trying to navigate this particular thing. And so now you have a really easy entry point to go in and start tapping with some of this stuff. As you do this, because making a decision like this is something that is so big, this might be one of those issues where it's super valuable to be reaching out to help around you. And that could be multifaceted. That could be tapping support. That could also be legal support and those sorts of things as you make these really big life decisions, or once you're on the other side, to make sure that you're not just moving on, but you're moving on in a healthy way. If you'd like more information about Kate, all you need to do is go to tappingpodcast.com, click on the link for episode 370, or if you go into the show notes, you will see a link to all of her amazing contact information. She's an absolute delight, and I am sure she'll be back on the show in the future. If you have any questions, any comments, a recommendation for a show topic in the future, I actually talked to Kate today because of a listener just like you had sent me an email say, hey, this is a really great topic and I'm really loving the stuff Kate is producing. Maybe you could have a conversation with her. And so please let me know how we can serve you in a constructive way on the podcast, because it's really about being useful. I was recently having a conversation with a bunch of podcast folks, and we were talking about, how do you know your show is successful? And part of my answer was, the first thing I recognize is that this is not my show. This is my audience's show. This isn't a vanity project. This is about creating something that is useful to serve you. And so the feedback that you give, affirming the things that are good, giving recommendations, is something that really makes a difference for me, so that as I'm planning out the next couple of months, we can produce those things that will really make a difference in your life. So just go to tappingpodcast.com. You can see the entire archive. Once you're on the site there, you can just click on the contact link, or you can email me directly. Everyone who has already downloaded the Tapping Q&A app, just go into the app, click on contact. You can send me a voice memo or an email from right inside of that app. If you haven't downloaded the app yet, go do that. You can do it in the Apple App Store and the Google App Store. In addition to the entire archive of all of the audio that is on the website, there's bonus audio that only appears in the app. And every single time we do a tap along audio, I also include a printed version of the script in the app by just clicking on the text session. That's TEXT at the top. You click on there and you will see the script right there. So if you're not in a circumstance where you can play the audio or you just want to tap through it really, really quickly, the script is right there for you. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli or Tapping Q&A.